The genetic horror discovery. Picture yourself standing in an ancient tomb 4,000 years after its last occupant took their final breath. The golden death mask gleams in your flashlight, hiding secrets that would horrify its creators. You reach out to touch the wrappings of a teenage pharaoh, and suddenly you understand a terrible truth. This boy didn't die because of illness or accident. He died because his parents were brother and sister. His grandparents were brother and sister. His great-grandparents were brother and sister. Every breath he took was a struggle against the genetic poison flowing through his veins. Imagine growing up knowing you're a living god, but your body betrays you every day. Your spine curves painfully. Your jaw won't close properly. You need a walking stick at age 16. Palace servants whisper about the curse that follows your bloodline like a shadow. You don't understand genetics, that science won't exist for thousands of years. But you know something is terribly wrong with your family. Your parents, your grandparents, everyone you've ever known believes that keeping your blood pure is worth any price. They see your suffering and call it divine. They watch children die in infancy and praise the gods' mysterious ways. They've created a living hell and named it paradise. What if I told you this wasn't fiction? What if I told you that the most powerful people on earth, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, spent 3,000 years systematically destroying themselves through genetic isolation? They believed their blood was divine, too precious to mix with mortals. Instead, they created a laboratory of human suffering that would echo through history. Before we descend into these golden tombs to uncover the truth about Egypt's most tragic rulers, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We're about to travel together through 3,000 years of suffering, and I find it incredible that people from across the world can witness these ancient tragedies together. To why pharaohs married their sisters, understand how the most powerful people on earth became victims of their own making, we must journey back to the beginning of Egyptian civilization. The pharaohs didn't set out to destroy themselves. They thought they were preserving something sacred. They believed their blood was different, divine, a gift from the gods themselves that must never be contaminated by mixing with mortal lineages. Picture the first pharaoh who decided his sister was the only woman worthy of his bed. He looked at his subjects, farmers, craftsmen, ordinary people, and felt revulsion at the thought of his divine essence mixing with their common blood. His priests nodded approvingly. His advisors calculated the political advantages. No one considered the price his children would pay. The logic seemed flawless at the time. Pharaohs weren't just kings. They were living gods. The earthly embodiment of Horus, divine descendants of Ra himself. How could a god marry a mortal? How could divine blood be diluted with human weakness? The answer to every priest and advisor in the palace was obvious. Gods must marry gods. Brothers must marry sisters. The bloodline must remain pure. What began as religious conviction became cultural obsession. Egyptian royal siblings grew up believing that marrying each other was not just normal, but necessary. They were taught that their bloodline carried the essence of Ra himself, that diluting it with foreign blood would anger the gods and doom the kingdom. Generation after generation, they condemned their own children to suffer for beliefs they never questioned. Each marriage between siblings was like adding poison to a well. The first generation might show only minor problems, a slight jaw irregularity perhaps, or unusual facial features. The priests would interpret these as marks of divine favor, proof that the gods had blessed this union. But the genetic damage accumulated like sediment in the Nile, building layer upon layer until the very foundation of the bloodline became toxic. What started as divine preservation became systematic destruction, but it happened so slowly that no one could see the pattern. A royal child born with a clubfoot, a blessing from the gods, a prince who died at 20, called home to serve in the afterlife, a princess who couldn't bear living children, chosen for higher spiritual purposes. Every genetic disaster was reinterpreted as divine will. every symptom of inbreeding transformed into evidence of godly favor. The Egyptians were brilliant. They built pyramids that still stand today, developed mathematics that amazes modern scholars, created one of the world's first written languages, but they couldn't see what was happening to their royal families because they refused to look. Court physicians documented strange illnesses and early Akhenaten. The heretics deformed family deaths, but never connected them to the obvious cause. They had all the evidence they needed spread across centuries of royal tombs, but their religious beliefs made them blind to the truth, staring them in the face. The genetic time bomb was ticking in every palace nursery, in every royal marriage bed, in every prayer offered for the continuation of the divine bloodline. What they thought would preserve their godhood would ultimately prove their humanity in the most tragic way possible. And nowhere was this tragedy more visible than in the royal family that would shock Egypt to its core. In the scorching desert heat of the 14th century BCE, a dynasty would emerge that would take royal inbreeding to its most extreme and most documented conclusion. This is the story of that dynasty, and it begins with one of the most disturbing figures in Egyptian history. In the sweltering heat of 1353 BCE in a palace overlooking the Nile, a child is born who will grow up to become one of history's most controversial pharaohs. But before Akhenaten becomes the heretic king who abandons Egypt's gods, he is simply a boy trapped in a body that betrays his divine claims. His skull is elongated, stretched like taffy. His hips are wide like a woman's. His chest develops breasts that no amount of royal clothing can hide. The young prince grows up surrounded by servants who avert their eyes and courtiers who speak in carefully measured phrases. Everyone can see that something is wrong with the future pharaoh, but no one dares speak the truth. His reflection in polished bronze shows him a face that doesn't match the god kings in temple paintings. His walk is awkward, his voice strange. Other children, if Pharaoh's children can be called children, watch him with a mixture of fear and pity. The palace becomes a theater of whispered conversations and averted gazes. Servants learn to look past his unusual proportions. Priests craft elaborate explanations for why their future god-king looks so different from the divine statues lining the temples. His parents, themselves products of generations of sibling marriage, see their son's deformities and convince themselves these are marks of special divine favor. After all, the gods work in mysterious ways. When the prince finally becomes pharaoh, he does something unprecedented. He orders artists to portray the royal family realistically. For the first time in Egyptian history, royal art shows elongated skulls, protruding bellies, and strange proportions. Historians call it an artistic revolution, but the truth is simpler and more tragic. The young king is tired of living a lie. If his body is a temple to the gods, then the gods must look exactly like he does. The paintings and sculptures from his reign, Tutankhamun, the boy king's tragic DNA, are haunting. They show a family that looks almost alien. Elongated heads, feminine curves on male bodies, children with the same disturbing proportions as their parents. Modern viewers often assume these are stylistic choices, artistic interpretations. They're not. Their documentation of genetic damage so severe that even royal propaganda couldn't hide it anymore. The heretic pharaoh marries Nefertiti, and together they produce 6 daughters. Court records hint at sons who die in infancy, their small bodies unable to survive the genetic burden passed down through generations.